The letter trembled in Emma Pierce's hand. The number seemed to grow larger with each passing second, transforming from mere digits into a life-altering threat. $7,100. Her rent was jumping from $2,350 to $7,100 per month. The morning light filtering through her office window caught the manila envelope her sister had tossed onto her desk minutes earlier, the expensive stationery bearing the letterhead of Vanessa's law firm. Emma's fingers traced the edge of the paper, feeling the texture of official letterhead beneath her fingertips. Her nails were stained with blue ink from signing maintenance requests all morning. The same blue ink her grandmother Catherine had used to sign the documents hidden away 3 years ago. Documents Emma had kept secret, waiting for this exact moment. "The entire building is mine," she whispered to the empty office, her voice barely audible over the ancient heating system that kept Cedar Heights apartments warm during Portland's chilly spring mornings. Outside her ground-floor office window, rain tapped a gentle rhythm against the glass. Through the droplets, Emma could see Mrs. Martinez shuffling toward the entrance with her weekly grocery bags. 6 years of managing this modest building had taught Emma the routines of every resident. Mrs. Martinez bought groceries every Tuesday. The Ahmed family's baby cried precisely at 2 a.m. Old Mr. Chen fed the stray cats behind the building each evening at dusk. She watched Mrs. Martinez struggle with the door, her arthritis making simple tasks increasingly difficult. Emma should help her. She always helped. But today she remained frozen at her desk, the rent increase letter holding her hostage to her thoughts. The distinctive click of designer heels on the lobby's worn marble floor announced Vanessa's return. Emma's spine stiffened involuntarily, a childhood reflex she'd never outgrown. "Have you finished reading it?" Vanessa asked, not bothering to knock as she re-entered the office. Her tailored navy suit probably cost more than Emma's entire wardrobe. The pearl necklace at her throat, a graduation gift from grandmother Catherine. When Vanessa finished Yale Law, caught the light with each perfectly practiced movement. "You're tripling my rent." Emma's voice emerged stronger than she expected. Vanessa adjusted her pearl necklace with manicured fingers. "Actually, it's 3.02 times your current rate. But don't worry. As family, we're giving you 60 days instead of the standard 30, Dad insisted. The casualness of Vanessa's cruelty was what always hurt most. The way she could deliver devastating news while examining her perfect manicure or checking her phone. "The family had a meeting last weekend about Cedar Heights." Vanessa continued pulling out her phone. "What meeting?" Emma set down her coffee mug, noticing how she said, "the family," as if Emma wasn't part of it. "It was an investors' discussion. Mom, Dad, myself, and Uncle David." Vanessa scrolled through her phone, barely looking up. "We've been reviewing the building's financials." Emma's throat tightened. "The building's financials are fine. We're at 95% occupancy. Maintenance is up to date." "The market's hot, Emma." "These are people's homes, Vanessa." Vanessa cut her off with a wave of her hand. "It's a business asset. Properties in this neighborhood are selling for 3 times what they were worth 5 years ago. We're hemorrhaging opportunity cost." There it was, the moment Emma had been waiting for since grandmother Catherine's death 3 years ago. The moment when family legacy would be reduced to opportunity cost. What about everyone else? Emma pictured the residents who'd become her extended family. "Are you raising their rents too?" "Market rate adjustments across the board." Vanessa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, already moving on to her next task. "They'll be homeless. They'll find housing within their means." Vanessa looked up from her screen, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes. Annoyance, disdain, perhaps both. "This is the real world, Emma. Grandmother coddled you, letting you play property manager, keeping rents artificially low. But she's been gone 3 years now, and it's time to maximize the asset's potential." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. Every childhood memory of being less than, of being the disappointment, crashed into this perfect distillation of how her family saw her, playing at being responsible, coddled, not serious. "Grandmother cared about people," Emma said quietly. "Grandmother was from a different era." Vanessa stood smoothing her skirt. "The vote was unanimous, Emma. Mom and Dad agree. It's what's best for the family's financial future." Emma's coffee turned bitter in her mouth. Mom and Dad had voted for this. They hadn't even told her there was a meeting. Oh, and we'll need you to distribute the notices to all residents by end of week. Vanessa moved toward the door, then paused. As property manager, that's still your job. For now. The threat in those last two words wasn't subtle. Vanessa, please. Can we talk about this? Maybe a smaller increase? There's nothing to discuss. Vanessa turned back, and the smile on her face was the same one she'd worn when she'd beaten Emma at Monopoly as kids. When she'd gotten into Yale while Emma was waitressing to pay for community college. When she'd bought her brownstone while Emma was still renting. It's just business, Emma. Don't take it personally. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Emma alone with the letter that would destroy everything she'd worked to maintain. She sank into her chair, staring at those numbers that seemed to grow larger by the second. $7,100. More than most of her residents made in a month. Her phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Notices need to go out by Friday, template attached. Don't forget to include yours. That smiling emoji summed up everything. This wasn't just business to Vanessa. She was enjoying this, enjoying putting Emma in her place, enjoying the power she held. Emma looked around her small office at the maintenance schedules she'd carefully organized, the birthday calendar where she tracked every resident's special day, the thank you cards pinned to her bulletin board from families she'd helped over the years. 6 years of her life, building a community, creating a home for people who needed one. And with a single vote, she wasn't even invited to participate in her own family, had decided to tear it all down. She thought about calling her parents, but what was the point? They'd chosen their side, voted to support Vanessa's plan without even telling Emma there was a meeting. The family had decided, and she wasn't really family. She was just the little sister who managed the building, whose below-market rent was a courtesy they could no longer afford to extend. Something Grandmother Catherine used to say echoed in Emma's mind. The truth has a way of surfacing, Emma. Just like cream in coffee, you can stir all you want, but it always rises to the top. Emma pulled open her desk drawer, looking for tissues, and her fingers brushed against something she'd forgotten was there. A small key on a faded ribbon. Grandmother's safety deposit box key. She'd been meaning to go through her remaining papers, but had never found the time. Maybe now was exactly the right time. Standing up, she pocketed the key and looked once more at the rent increase letter. Vanessa thought she'd won. Thought she'd put Emma in her place once and for all. Her parents thought they were making a smart business decision. But Grandmother Catherine had loved this building, had loved these people. She wouldn't have left things this simple, this cruel. She'd been too smart for that, too loving. And as Emma locked her office door, heading for the bank, she couldn't shake the feeling that Grandmother had one more surprise waiting, one that her family's unanimous vote hadn't accounted for. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. The bank felt imposing with its high ceilings and marble floors that amplified every footstep. Emma clutched the safety deposit box key so tightly it left an imprint on her palm. The manager led her to a private room where the metal box awaited. Her pulse quickened as she inserted the key and lifted the lid. Her heart sank. The box was empty, except for a single folded note in her grandmother's distinctive handwriting. Look closer to home, dear one. Cryptic. Typical Catherine. Emma's shoulders slumped as she refolded the note and tucked it into her pocket. She'd been so certain she'd find something useful, some legal document, some proof, some leverage against Vanessa's machinations. She'd barely made it back to her apartment when she heard a soft knock on her door. Emma wasn't prepared for visitors, still reeling from finding Grandmother's safety deposit box empty, except for that cryptic note. Ruth Winters stood in her doorway, her 72-year-old frame wrapped in a hand-knitted cardigan she'd worn every day since her husband passed. She held a tea tray with 2 cups and a plate of her famous lemon cookies. "You look like you could use some chamomile, dear," she said, not waiting for an invitation before shuffling past Emma into her living room. Ruth had been Grandmother Catherine's closest friend, their daily tea ritual as sacred as Sunday church. After Grandmother passed, Ruth had tried to include Emma in the tradition, but she'd always been too busy with building maintenance, too overwhelmed with grief. Today, she didn't have the energy to refuse. "I heard about the rent increases," Ruth said, settling into Emma's armchair as if she belonged there. "Mrs. Martinez is in tears. The Ahmed family is already looking at listings in Gresham." News travels fast. Emma sank onto her couch, accepting the cup Ruth offered. The chamomile's honeyed scent reminded her painfully of grandmother's kitchen. Your sister made quite an entrance this morning. Ruth's sharp eyes studied Emma over her teacup. Very professional, very efficient. That's one word for it. I have other words, but Catherine raised me better than that. She set down her cup with deliberate precision. Though I must say this whole business smells fishier than the docks at low tide. It's perfectly legal. Emma said, the words bitter in her mouth. Property owners can raise rent to market rate. Vanessa made sure to cite all the relevant statutes in her letter. Legal and right aren't the same thing. Ruth leaned forward. Your grandmother knew that. It's why she loved you so much. You understood that a building isn't just bricks and mortar. It's the lives inside it. Tears pricked Emma's eyes. Well, apparently the rest of my family disagrees. They voted to maximize the asset's potential. She mimicked Vanessa's clinical tone. Voted? Ruth's eyebrows climbed toward her silver hairline. When was this vote? Last weekend, apparently. A family investors meeting I wasn't invited to. Interesting. She pulled a small notebook from her cardigan pocket, the same kind grandmother used to carry. And who exactly attended this meeting? Vanessa, my parents, Uncle David. Why? Ruth made a note, her handwriting still precise despite her age. I worked as a legal secretary for 40 years, dear. 30 of those at Hartwell and Associates dealing with property law. She looked up. In my experience, when family members hold secret meetings about inherited property, something's usually rotten. A chill ran down Emma's spine. What are you saying? I'm saying your grandmother was the sharpest woman I knew. She played bridge like a chess master and ran this building like a Swiss watch. Ruth helped herself to a cookie. She also didn't trust your sister as far as she could throw her. Told me so herself, right in this room 2 weeks before she died. Emma's hand trembled, tea sloshing dangerously close to the cup's rim. She never said anything to me about not trusting Vanessa. She didn't want to burden you. You were already doing so much keeping this place running while she was sick. Ruth's voice softened, but she was worried. Vanessa had been asking questions about the building's value, about development potential, about zoning laws. Catherine didn't like it. But Vanessa barely visited when grandmother was alive. She visited plenty, just not when you were around. Ruth's revelation hit like cold water. Always came during your Tuesday morning supply runs. Always left before you got back. Emma's mind raced trying to process this information. Why didn't you tell me before? What good would it have done? You were grieving, trying to keep everything together. She patted Emma's hand. But now with this rent business, I think it's time we did some digging. Digging? Your grandmother kept files on everything, receipts from 1987, tax returns going back decades. She was meticulous. Ruth stood with surprising agility. If something's off about this whole situation, there will be a paper trail. Emma thought about the empty safety deposit box, the cryptic note. I've been looking. Not in the bank, dear, here. Ruth tapped her foot on Emma's floor. Catherine had a horror of safety deposit boxes after the S&L crisis, kept her important papers close. Emma's heart skipped. Where? That's what we need to figure out. Ruth moved toward Emma's door, then turned back. Start with her apartment. I know Vanessa had it cleaned out, but Catherine was clever. She would have hidden anything important where your sister wouldn't think to look. Vanessa had professional estate cleaners go through everything. There's nothing left. Did they check inside the radiator covers, behind the electrical panels? Under the floorboard in the closet that always creaked? Ruth smiled at Emma's shocked expression. Catherine and I shared many secrets over our tea, including where she kept her emergency chocolate stash. After Ruth left, Emma sat in her apartment, mind spinning. The building felt different now. Not just her workplace and home, but a puzzle grandmother had left behind. Look closer to home, her note had said. She grabbed her master keys and headed to the basement storage area. Grandmother's unit was in the far corner, supposedly emptied after Vanessa's efficient cleaning. The metal door creaked open, revealing bare concrete walls and dusty shelves. But Ruth was right. Grandmother had been clever. Emma started with the obvious places, running her hands along shelf brackets, checking for loose screws or hidden panels. Nothing. Then she remembered something, grandmother's obsession with her old Singer sewing machine. the one she'd insisted on keeping in storage despite never using it. Vanessa thought it was junk, Emma muttered, spotting the machine in the corner covered by a dusty tarp. The machine itself yielded nothing, but as Emma moved it, she noticed the floor beneath it sounded different, hollow. Her pulse quickened as she found the edges of a carefully cut square in the concrete painted to match perfectly. Inside the hidden compartment was a fireproof box. Her hand shook as she opened it, revealing neat folders labeled in grandmother's precise handwriting. Bank statements, correspondence, building documents, and one marked simply, "For Emma, when the time comes." She opened the correspondence folder first, and her blood ran cold. Email printouts between Vanessa and various developers, dating back 2 years before grandmother's death. Discussions about potential redevelopment, maximizing land value, and strategic rent increases to facilitate voluntary vacancy. One email from Vanessa to a company called Apex Development made Emma's stomach turn. "Once we have control, we can clear the building within 6 months. The old tenants won't fight if we make staying uncomfortable enough." But it was the folder marked for her that held the biggest surprise. Inside was a letter in grandmother's handwriting. "My dear Emma, if you're reading this, then Vanessa has shown her hand. I've watched her circle this building like a vulture, and I knew she'd move once I was gone. But you, my dear, have something she doesn't. You understand that wealth isn't just about money. It's about community, about home, about taking care of each other. Check with Howard Reed." A phone number was written below, followed by more documents. Legal papers with terms like LLC and beneficial ownership and trust structures that Emma didn't understand. She sat back on her heels in the dusty storage room, pieces of a larger picture starting to form. Vanessa's rent increase wasn't just about market rates. It was the first move in a longer game, one she'd been planning for years. But grandmother had been playing a longer game still. Emma carefully returned everything to the box and took it back to her apartment. Tomorrow she'd call this Howard Reed. Tonight she had notices to deliver, but not the ones Vanessa expected. As she drafted a memo to her residents about an emergency building meeting, she thought about Ruth's words, "Legal and right aren't the same thing." Grandmother had taught her that too. She'd also taught her that in chess the best defense was often a carefully planned counterattack. And thanks to her hidden files, Emma finally had the pieces she needed to play. The morning Emma was supposed to distribute Vanessa's rent increase notices, she instead found herself sitting in a small cafe in southeast Portland, watching rain streak down the windows. Across from her, Howard Reed looked nothing like the high-powered attorney she'd expected. In his 70s, wearing a well-worn cardigan and nursing a cup of black coffee, he could have been any retiree enjoying a quiet morning until he started talking. "Your grandmother was one of the smartest clients I ever had," he said, pulling a thick folder from his briefcase. "Also one of the most suspicious. She came to me 3 years before she passed, convinced your sister was plotting something." 3 years. Emma set down her untouched latte. "Right around when Vanessa started visiting her during your supply runs." Howard's knowing smile reminded her of grandmother's. Catherine noticed. She noticed everything. He opened the folder, revealing documents that made Emma's head spin. "Your grandmother restructured the building's ownership in a very specific way. On paper, the family trust owns Cedar Heights Apartments. That's what your sister sees what she's acting on. But ownership was actually transferred to an LLC called Evergreen Holdings 3 years ago. The trust only manages the building. It doesn't own it." He slid a document across the table. "And Evergreen Holdings has one sole owner." Emma stared at the paperwork, her name printed clearly on the ownership documents. "I don't understand. I never signed anything. I would remember." "You did sign. Your grandmother had you sign what you thought were routine management papers. Page 47 of your employment contract update, to be specific." His eyes crinkled with amusement. Catherine was very thorough. Every signature witnessed, every document notarized, every I dotted and T crossed. Emma's mind reeled. "So I've owned this building for 3 years. Legally, yes. Your grandmother set it up so ownership would be invisible until someone tried to do exactly what your sister is doing, act outside the scope of property management." He pulled out another document. "Which brings us to this." The letter was addressed to Emma, grandmother's handwriting still clear and strong. "Emma, my darling girl. If Howard is showing you this, then your sister has finally made her move. I'm sorry for the deception, but I knew Vanessa would never let you have the building if she knew the truth. She's too much like my brother Harold, sees everything in dollars and cents, never in hearts and souls. The building is yours legally and completely. Evergreen Holdings was my final gift to you, named after the ivy that grows on the building's east wall, the one you always said made it look like home. Vanessa can raise rents as property manager, but she needs owner approval for any increase over 10%. She doesn't have it. More importantly, check the management agreement section 15.3.2. Vanessa should have read the fine print. I've watched you pour your heart into Cedar Heights for years. You know every resident's story, every leaky pipe, every dream and worry within those walls. That's why it's yours. Not because you're the best at business, but because you're the best at caring. Make me proud, sweetheart, and don't let your sister's fancy law degree intimidate you. Right is might, and you've got both. All my love. Grandmother Catherine P.S. Tell Ruth she was right about the storage room floor. That woman always was too clever for her own good. Tears blurred Emma's vision as she looked up at Howard. Section 15.3.2. His grin widened. Automatic termination of management rights upon any attempt to raise rents more than 10% without documented owner approval. Your sister just fired herself. But she's a lawyer. How did she miss this? Arrogance mostly. She assumed the family trust owned everything outright, never bothered to check for encumbrances or alternative ownership structures. He sipped his coffee. Plus, Catherine was clever. The LLC filing was done in Delaware, the paperwork buried in routine trust administration. Unless you knew exactly what to look for, you'd never find it. Emma thought about Vanessa's smug smile, her certainty that she'd won. What do I do now? That's up to you. You could confront her immediately, but… He leaned back. Your grandmother left one more piece of advice. Said if this day came, I should suggest you let Vanessa dig her hole a little deeper first. Emma frowned. What does that mean? Check your building's bank accounts. See if all the rent money is where it should be. Review the maintenance expenses. Your grandmother suspected Vanessa might be skimming, but we never had proof. The implications hit Emma like a punch. She's been stealing, allegedly. But if she has been, and if she continues thinking she's in charge… He shrugged. Well, embezzlement is a felony, and judges don't look kindly on lawyers who steal from family. Emma spent the rest of the morning in Howard's office, reviewing documents, understanding the full scope of what grandmother had done. She'd thought of everything: backup documentation, clear chains of ownership, even a transition plan for when the truth came out. One more thing, Howard said as Emma prepared to leave. He handed her a sealed envelope. Catherine said to give you this when you were ready. Said you'd know when that was. Emma held the envelope, her name written across it in grandmother's familiar script. How do I know if I'm ready? I think, Howard said gently. The fact that you're asking means you are. Emma opened it in her car, rain drumming on the roof. Inside was a single photo, grandmother and Emma, at the building's entrance, taken the day she'd made her property manager. On the back she'd written, the building was never about the bricks, sweetheart. It was about trust. I trust you. Now trust yourself. Ruth was waiting when Emma got back to Cedar Heights, practically vibrating with curiosity. Well, what did you find? Emma looked at her, then at the building. Her building, she realized with a shock. Through the lobby window, she could see Mr. Chen teaching the Ahmed children to play chess. Mrs. Martinez knitting in her favorite corner. Her residence, her responsibility, her family of choice. I found out grandmother was even smarter than we thought, she said, finally, and that Vanessa is about to learn a very expensive lesson about reading the fine print. So, what's our next move? Ruth asked, eyes gleaming with an anticipation that made her look decades younger. Emma thought about Vanessa's rent notices, still sitting on her desk, about the residents waiting anxiously to know their fate, about the developers circling like sharks. Then she thought about grandmother's trust, Howard's advice, and the bank statements she needed to review. Now, Emma said, squaring her shoulders, we start documenting everything. Every conversation, every transaction, every single thing Vanessa does from this moment forward. She smiled, feeling grandmother's strategic mind working through her. We let her think she's won. We let her get comfortable. And when she's shown everyone exactly who she really is, we show her the door. Ruth finished grinning wickedly. As they walked into the building together, Emma felt the weight of responsibility, but also the warmth of purpose. Grandmother had given her more than a building. She'd given her the tools to protect it, the wisdom to use them wisely, and the reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't immediate. Sometimes it's justice served at exactly the right temperature. The chess game grandmother had started 3 years ago was entering its final phase. And thanks to her brilliant forward thinking, Emma held all the pieces that mattered. Check. The bank manager's face went pale as she scrolled through the account records on her screen. Ms. Pierce, these withdrawals, they're substantial. Emma sat across from her in the small office at First National, her stomach churning as the manager turned the monitor toward her. Ruth sat beside her, her hand gripping Emma's under the desk. $92,000, Emma whispered, staring at the systematic withdrawals over the past 2 years. She stole $92,000. Each transaction was carefully crafted maintenance expenses, emergency repairs, vendor payments. But Howard had taught Emma what to look for, and Ruth's 40 years of legal secretary experience helped them spot the patterns, the same vendor names appearing monthly, the round numbers that real repairs never came to the signatures that didn't match their actual maintenance crew's paperwork. The building's emergency fund is completely drained, the manager confirmed. And these transfers to personal accounts, can you trace where the money went? Ruth asked, her voice sharp. We'll need a formal investigation, but preliminary review shows transfers to an account under Vanessa Pierce's name and several credit card payments. She printed out the statements, stamping them with the bank's official seal. I'll need to file a suspicious activity report. Outside the bank, Emma had to sit on a bench, overwhelmed by the betrayal. Ruth rubbed her back as she processed what they'd discovered. She was stealing while grandmother was dying, Emma said, voice cracking. While I was taking care of the building, thinking we were all working together, she was robbing us blind. And now she wants to raise rents to cover her tracks, Ruth said grimly. Force out the long-term residents who might ask questions, bring in new ones who don't know the building's history. Emma's phone buzzed a text from Vanessa. Did you distribute the notices? I need confirmation by 5:00 p.m. She stared at the message, rage building in her chest. Then she typed back, meeting with residents tonight. We'll update after. What are you planning? Ruth asked. Howard said to let her dig the hole deeper. Emma stood newfound determination, straightening her spine. So let's give her a shovel. That evening, Emma called a resident meeting in the community room. Every unit was represented families, clutching the rent increase notices she'd finally distributed, elderly residents, looking frightened young couples calculating desperately on their phones. I know you're all worried, Emma began, standing at the front of the room. The rent increases are shocking, and I want you to know I'm doing everything I can to fight this. How can you fight? Mr. Chen called out. Your sister owns building now. No, Emma chose her words carefully. The ownership structure is complicated. What I can tell you is that no one should make any decisions about moving yet. I'm working with legal counsel to review our options. Legal counsel. Mrs. Martinez looked hopeful. You think there's a chance? I think Grandmother Catherine wouldn't have wanted this. Emma met eyes around the room. And I think she was too smart to leave us unprotected. The meeting continued for another hour, residents sharing their fears, their anger, their memories of grandmother. Emma took notes, recorded everything with their permission, building the case Howard said they'd need. As people filed out, the Ahmed family approached Emma. Miss Emma, Mrs. Ahmed said softly. We found apartment in Gresham, but we wait. Yes, you really think you can stop this? Emma thought about the ownership documents in her safe, about Vanessa's embezzlement, about the careful trap grandmother had laid. I know I can. Trust me a little longer. After everyone left, Emma found Ruth still sitting in the community room, going through her notebook. I've been tracking things, she said. Every time Vanessa visited the building, every interaction with residents, every complaint we've received. Did you know she's been having her lawyer friends send threatening letters to anyone who's been late on rent? What? Emma grabbed the letters Ruth showed her. These are horrible. Mrs. Chen was 2 days late because her Social Security check was delayed and they threatened eviction. Building a paper trail of problem tenants, Ruth said disgustedly, making it easier to force them out. Later, Emma's phone rang. Vanessa. Emma, I just got off a call with Apex Development, she said without preamble. They're very interested in the building, but they need us to be at 50% occupancy or less to make their offer. The rent increases are just phase 1. Emma hit record on her phone, gesturing for Ruth to stay quiet. Phase 1. Once the bleeding hearts move out, we'll find code violations for the rest. Bedbugs are always effective. People flee from those, and you can't prove where they came from. She laughed. By summer, we'll have a clear building and an 8-figure offer. 8 figures? Emma kept her voice neutral, playing dumb. That location is gold for luxury condos. Daddy's already looking at retirement properties in Scottsdale with his share. And the current residents? Not our problem. Vanessa's voice hardened. You need to stop coddling them, Emma. This is business. Either you're with the family on this or you're against us. I'm just trying to understand the plan. The plan is simple. We maximize value, we sell, we move on. Grandmother held us back for decades with her ridiculous sentimentality. She's gone now, and it's time to act like the landlords we are, not social workers. Right. And Emma, remember your below-market rent was conditional on your cooperation. I'd hate to have to evict my own sister. She hung up, and Emma looked at Ruth. Did you hear that? Every disgusting word. Ruth was practically vibrating with fury. She just confessed to planning to fabricate bedbug infestations. That's fraud, dear. Emma saved the recording, emailing it immediately to Howard with a backup to her personal cloud storage. Then she sat back thinking about the envelope Howard had given her grandmother's final piece of advice. She opened it again, rereading the short note inside. When she threatens family, she's shown her true colors. Time to show yours. What do you think that means? Ruth asked, reading over Emma's shoulder. Emma thought about Vanessa's words. Your below-market rent was conditional on your cooperation. The threat to evict her own sister. If she didn't help destroy their residents' lives. It means grandmother knew exactly who Vanessa was, Emma said slowly. And she knew that eventually Vanessa would threaten to destroy me too if I didn't fall in line. So what do we do? Emma stood, feeling something shift inside her. The scared little sister was gone, replaced by the woman grandmother had trained her to be protector of this building and its people. We document everything. We build an airtight case. She smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. Then we show everyone exactly what Vanessa Pierce is willing to do for money, including betraying her own family. Ruth grinned back, looking like the legal secretary who'd helped take down corrupt lawyers for 40 years. Now you're talking like Catherine's granddaughter. As they locked up the community room, Emma looked at the building's walls, solid, dependable sheltering. Grandmother had trusted her with more than property. She'd trusted her with homes, with lives, with the very concept of community, in a world that increasingly valued only profit. Vanessa thought she held all the cards. She had no idea the game had changed completely, and Emma was done playing by her rules. The next 2 weeks became a masterclass in strategic patience. While Vanessa believed Emma was cowing residents into submission, Emma and Ruth were building something else entirely, an unshakable foundation of evidence. Their command center was Ruth's apartment, her dining table disappearing under color-coded folders, bank statements, and printed emails. They worked like detectives, or perhaps, more accurately, like grandmother Catherine would have worked methodically, carefully, with purpose. Look at this, Ruth said one evening, pointing to a spreadsheet she'd created. Every maintenance expense Vanessa approved in the last 2 years. See the pattern? Emma leaned over her shoulder, studying the numbers. They're all just under $10,000. Odd, isn't it, the threshold requiring board approval? She kept everything below the limit where your parents would have to sign off. Ruth highlighted row after row. And look at the vendor names. Mercury Maintenance, Atlas Repairs, Phoenix Property Services. They all sound legitimate. They're all incorporated in Delaware, all at the same registered agent address, all formed within days of each other. Ruth pulled up her browser. And none of them have any web presence reviews or employee records. They're shell companies. Emma's phone buzzed another text from Vanessa. She'd been checking in daily, pressuring Emma about resident compliance. This time she'd sent a photo from a Miami beach celebrating the future. "Can't wait to close the Apex deal. Thanks for handling the difficult conversations, sis." Emma showed Ruth the message. She snorted. "Celebrating with stolen money. Document that. 2 location services show she's at the Ritz-Carlton. Their rooms are $800 a night." They photographed everything, creating both digital and physical copies. Howard had emphasized the importance of redundancy. "Assume someone will try to destroy evidence," he'd warned, "because they will." The residents, meanwhile, were holding strong. Word had spread through the building that Emma was fighting for them, and they'd responded with their own form of resistance. Mrs. Martinez organized a phone tree. The Ahmed family started a building newsletter documenting memories of grandmother Catherine. Mr. Chen began teaching free chess lessons to any child in the building, creating a sense of community Vanessa couldn't price out. "We're not just numbers on her spreadsheet," Mrs. Martinez told Emma fiercely. "We're neighbors. We're family." It was Mr. Chen who provided their next breakthrough. He knocked on Emma's door one morning holding a manila envelope. "I am remembering something," he said in his careful English. "Your grandmother, she asked me to keep this. Said someday you might need. I forget after she died, but cleaning closet today I find." Inside were photographs Vanessa entering the building at various times, all time-stamped during Emma's Tuesday supply runs. But more importantly, there were photos of her with a man Emma didn't recognize, the two of them reviewing documents in the lobby. "Who is this?" Emma asked. "Marcus Wolf," Mr. Chen said, "from Apex Development. They meet many times before your grandmother died. Always when you gone." Emma's blood chilled. Vanessa had been planning this before grandmother was even gone. Ruth immediately began cross-referencing the dates with grandmother's medical records. "Emma," she said slowly, "these meetings, they coincide with your grandmother's bad days. Days when she was on heavy pain medication. Vanessa was meeting with developers while grandmother was suffering upstairs. Worse." Ruth's voice was grim. "Look at the signature on the preliminary agreement with Apex. It's dated 2 weeks before Catherine died." Emma stared at what was clearly meant to be grandmother's signature, but wasn't. She forged it, or got it when Catherine wasn't lucid. Either way, Ruth trailed off, but they both knew the implications. This went beyond embezzlement. This was elder abuse fraud conspiracy. That night, Emma called Howard. "We need to move soon. Vanessa's getting impatient, and I'm worried she'll escalate." "Do you have enough evidence?" Emma looked around Ruth's apartment at their war room of documentation. "We have proof of embezzlement fraud conspiracy with Apex forged signatures and recorded admissions of planning to fabricate code violations. Is that enough?" Howard chuckled. "Catherine would be so proud." "Yes, that's more than enough. But there's one more thing. We need a public forum where Vanessa can't control the narrative." "What kind of forum?" "Patience. I'm arranging something. Keep documenting and be ready to move when I give the signal." 2 days later, Vanessa escalated exactly as Emma had feared. She showed up with 3 men in suits, lawyers from her firm. "We're conducting unit inspections," she announced in the lobby loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looking for lease violations, unauthorized occupants, any health code issues. You need to give 24 hours notice for inspections," Emma said calmly. "Not for suspected health hazards." Vanessa smiled that sharp smile. "We've had reports of pest activity." "From whom?" "Anonymous complaints, very serious ones." She gestured to her lawyers. "My colleagues will be documenting everything. I suggest you tell your residents to cooperate fully." Emma knew this was the manufactured crisis Vanessa had threatened, but she played along. "Of course, though I should mention we just had our quarterly pest inspection last week. Clean bill of health." Vanessa's smile flickered. "We'll see about that." The lawyers spent 4 hours going through units, photographing everything, clearly looking for any excuse to issue violations. But the residents were ready. Mrs. Martinez had organized a cleaning brigade the night before. Every unit was spotless. Every lease term followed to the letter. "Nothing," one lawyer reported to Vanessa. "These are some of the cleanest units I've inspected." Vanessa's face darkened. "Check again." "We've checked 3 times. There's nothing here that violates any codes or lease terms." She turned on Emma. "What did you do?" "My job." Emma said simply. I manage a well-maintained building with responsible tenants, just like grandmother taught me. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. You think you're so clever, fine. We'll do this the hard way. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Mom, Dad, and Uncle David. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. We're voting on immediate management changes. Looking forward to it, Emma said. Vanessa stared at her, probably wondering why Emma wasn't panicking. You should be worried, Emma. When the board votes you out, you'll have 30 days to vacate your apartment, below market rate or not. After she left with her legal entourage, Ruth emerged from her apartment where she'd been recording everything through her door's peephole. Did you get it all? Every word, dear, including her admission that the pest reports were fake. Ruth grinned. She really doesn't learn, does she? Emma thought about tomorrow's board meeting about the family that had chosen Vanessa's money over her community. They thought they were gathering to remove her. They had no idea they were walking into Grandmother Catherine's final checkmate. No, she said, feeling remarkably calm. She doesn't, but she's about to. Emma spent that night gathering every piece of evidence, every document, every recording. Howard had said to wait for his signal, and she trusted him the way Grandmother had. Tomorrow, her family would learn who really owned Cedar Heights apartments, and Vanessa would discover that sometimes the little sister you've underestimated your whole life is exactly the opponent you should have feared most. The building was quiet as Emma finally went to bed, but she could feel it like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for justice. Grandmother, she thought, looking at her photo on her nightstand. I hope I make you proud tomorrow. Somehow she knew she would. The doorbell rang at 8 a.m., 6 hours before the board meeting that was supposed to seal Emma's fate. She opened it to find her parents standing there, her mother clutching her purse like armor, her father avoiding eye contact. We need to talk, Mom said, pushing past Emma into her apartment. This has gone too far, Emma. Dad followed, looking around her modest living room with an expression she couldn't read. They'd rarely visited since Grandmother died, too busy with their retirement plans, their golf club memberships, their new life funded by Vanessa's success. Would you like coffee? Emma offered, playing the dutiful daughter one last time. This isn't a social visit. Mom settled onto Emma's couch like a judge preparing to pass sentence. Vanessa called us last night. She says you're being obstructive, turning the residents against her, sabotaging the sale. I'm protecting our residents, Mom. Families who've lived here for decades. They're not our residents, Dad interrupted, finally meeting Emma's eyes. They're tenants, and it's time you understood the difference. The words stung more than Emma expected. Grandmother understood the difference. She chose to care anyway. Your grandmother was from a different time, Mom said dismissively. She let emotion cloud her business judgment. We won't make the same mistake. Emotion. Emma felt her carefully maintained calm beginning to crack. Is that what you call treating people with dignity? We call it being practical, Dad said. Vanessa has shown us the numbers. This building is worth $12 million as luxury condos. That's $3 million for you, Emma. Enough to set you up for life. I don't want the money. Then you're a fool. Mom's words were sharp, final. Just like your grandmother, clinging to old-fashioned ideas while the world moves on. Emma studied her parents, these people who'd raised her, who'd taught her to share and be kind and help others. When did they become these cold strangers who saw dollar signs instead of human beings? What happened to you? She asked quietly. When did you become people who would throw families onto the street for money? When we realized we'd spent our whole lives being poor while others got rich, Dad said bitterly. Your grandmother had $1 million asset and let people live in it for peanuts. We won't make that mistake. Those peanuts kept roofs over heads, food on tables, children in schools. Not our problem, Mom echoed Vanessa's words from weeks ago. Emma, you need to decide which side you're on, your family or strangers. The residents aren't strangers. They're nothing to us. Mom cut her off. You have until the meeting to decide. Support Vanessa's plan or we'll vote you out as property manager. And yes, that means you'll lose your apartment too. Below market rent is for family who acts like family. They stood to leave, but Emma couldn't let them go without trying one more time. What if I told you Vanessa's been stealing, that she's been embezzling from the building for years? Mom laughed. Actually laughed. Vanessa makes more in a month than you make in a year. Why would she need to steal? Greed, Mom. Pure greed. You're pathetic, she said, and the contempt in her voice broke something inside Emma. Making up lies about your successful sister because you're jealous. We raised you better than this. No, Emma said quietly. Grandmother raised me better than this. You just happened to be there. Mom's face flushed. You ungrateful little... I think you should leave, Emma said, opening her door. I'll see you at the meeting. With your resignation letter, I hope, Dad said as they left. It's the only sensible move you have left. After they were gone, Emma sank onto her couch shaking. Ruth appeared moments later. She had an uncanny ability to know when Emma needed support. I heard raised voices, she said gently, sitting beside Emma. Your parents, they're choosing money over everything grandmother believed in, Emma whispered. They actually laughed when I mentioned Vanessa's theft. Because they don't want to believe it. It's easier to paint you as the jealous failure than admit their golden child is a criminal. Ruth patted Emma's hand. But the truth has a way of coming out, especially in board meetings. Emma's phone buzzed a text from Howard. Change of plans. Can you get everyone to the community room at 1:30 before the board meeting? Emma showed Ruth the message. What do you think he's planning? Something Catherine would approve of, she said with a knowing smile. That man never did anything without 3 backup plans. They spent the next hours preparing, making copies of crucial documents, organizing evidence in a presentation that even Emma's parents couldn't dismiss. At 1 p.m., Emma sent a building-wide message. Important meeting in community room at 1:30. Your future here depends on it. By 1:25, the room was packed. Every resident was there, from the young families to the elderly, all facing an uncertain future. The anxiety in the room was palpable. At exactly 1:30, Howard walked in. But he wasn't alone. A court reporter followed him, setting up equipment. And behind them came 3 people Emma didn't recognize, all carrying official-looking briefcases. Ladies and gentlemen, Howard announced, I'm Howard Reed, attorney for the true owner of Cedar Heights Apartments. We're here to inform you that despite what you've been told, your homes are safe. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Emma stood up. Howard, what's happening? He smiled. What's happening is transparency. These are representatives from the state attorney's office, the Department of Consumer Protection, and the Real Estate Commission. They're very interested in what's been happening at Cedar Heights. The door burst open. Vanessa stood there, face flushed with anger, Emma's parents and Uncle David behind her. What is this? Vanessa demanded. The board meeting is in my office. No, Howard said calmly. The board meeting is wherever the owner decides to hold it. And the owner has decided on the community room. I'm the managing partner of the family trust, Vanessa sputtered. I decide. You're the former managing partner, Emma said, standing up. As of 1:27 p.m., when you attempted to raise rents over 10% without owner approval, triggering the automatic termination clause in Section 15.3.2 of the management agreement, Howard replied. Vanessa's face went white. What are you talking about? The family trust owns the building. No, Emma said, pulling out the ownership documents. I do. Evergreen Holdings LLC sole proprietor Emma Catherine Pierce has been for 3 years. The room erupted. Residents gasped. Emma's parents stared in shock, and Vanessa looked like she'd been punched. That's impossible, she said. I would have known. You would have if you'd done proper due diligence instead of assuming you knew everything. Howard opened his briefcase. But that's not the only reason we're here today. The state attorney representative stepped forward. Ms. Vanessa Pierce, we've received credible evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and elder abuse. We'll need you to come with us for questioning. This is ridiculous. Vanessa backed toward the door. You can't prove anything. Actually, Emma said, pulling up her phone. I can. She played the recording of Vanessa admitting to planning fake bedbug infestations, to meeting with Apex Development, to forcing out residents. The room listened in horrified silence as Vanessa's own words condemned her. Additionally, Ruth stood up holding her meticulously organized folders. We have documented evidence of $92,000 in fraudulent withdrawals, shell companies created to siphon building funds, and forge signatures on contracts with developers, while Mrs. Catherine Pierce was on her deathbed. The government officials moved toward Vanessa, who looked desperately at Emma's parents. Mom, Dad, tell them this is a mistake. But Emma's parents were staring at the evidence being displayed, the color draining from their faces, as they realized their golden child was exactly what Emma had tried to tell them, a thief and a fraud. Vanessa, Mom whispered, is this true? I was trying to maximize value, Vanessa shouted. For all of us, Emma doesn't understand business. Emma understands that business without ethics is just theft with extra steps, Howard said. Your grandmother knew that. It's why she made sure Emma would be here to stop you. As the officials led Vanessa away, she turned to look at Emma one last time. You ruined everything. No, Emma said quietly. You ruined everything the day you decided money mattered more than people. I just made sure you couldn't hurt anyone else. The room was silent after Vanessa left, everyone processing what they'd witnessed. Then Mr. Chen started clapping slowly. Mrs. Martinez joined him, then the Ahmed family, and soon the entire room was applauding. Emma's parents stood frozen by the door, looking lost. For a moment, she felt sorry for them. Their retirement dreams, funded by Vanessa's success, were crumbling before their eyes. Emma, Dad said hoarsely, we didn't know. You didn't want to know, Emma corrected gently. It was easier to believe I was jealous than to believe she was corrupt. They left without another word, shoulders slumped with the weight of their choices. Uncle David slunk out behind them, probably calculating how much of his investment in Vanessa's schemes he'd lost. Howard waited until the room settled before speaking again. Now then, as the owner's attorney, I'm authorized to announce that all rent increase notices are hereby rescinded. Rents will remain at current levels with only cost of living adjustments, as outlined in your original leases. The cheer that went up could probably be heard 3 blocks away. Emma stood in the midst of it all, stunned by how quickly everything had changed. Just this morning, she'd been fighting to save her home. Now she owned the entire building. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Ruth. Catherine would be proud, she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. So proud. The aftermath was both simpler and more complicated than Emma had expected. The state's investigation into Vanessa's embezzlement and fraud moved forward swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming, and prosecutors were eager to make an example of a lawyer who'd abused her position of trust. But the emotional fallout was messier. Emma's parents called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that veered between apology and defensiveness. Uncle David sent a letter offering to invest in the building, an offer Emma politely declined. And the residents, while grateful, now looked at her differently, not just as their manager, but as their landlord. It was a responsibility Emma took seriously. She spent the next weeks reviewing the building's finances, trying to understand exactly how deep the damage went. The $92,000 Vanessa had stolen had been earmarked for crucial maintenance. The boiler system needed. Replacing the roof was overdue for repairs, and the electrical system required updating to meet current codes. We'll need to prioritize, Emma told Ruth one evening as they went through the building's accounts. The boiler has to come first. We can't have people freezing next winter. But what about the roof? One good storm and we could have water damage in multiple units. Emma rubbed her temples. I know. But we don't have enough for both, not after what Vanessa took. Have you considered a loan? Howard asked, joining them for their now regular strategy sessions. With what collateral? The building is already leveraged. Not as much as you might think. Howard pulled out a document. Your grandmother was conservative with debt. The building has substantial equity. Emma frowned. But taking on more debt means higher costs, which means raising rents eventually. I don't want to do that to the residents. Spoken like a true property manager, Ruth said with a smile. But now you need to think like an owner too. Sometimes short-term debt prevents long-term disaster. Emma knew she was right, but the idea of becoming what she'd fought against, a landlord raising rents, twisted something inside her. She was still wrestling with this when Mrs. Martinez knocked on her door the next day. We need to talk, she said, her usual warmth tempered by determination. The residents have had a meeting. Emma's stomach dropped. Were they organizing against her now? Had she become the enemy? Come in, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Mrs. Martinez settled into Emma's armchair, the same one Ruth always claimed. We know about the financial situation. Mr. Chen overheard you talking with Miss Ruth. The boiler, the roof, the electrical, all of it. Emma sighed. I'm trying to figure it out, Mrs. Martinez. I promise I won't raise rents drastically. I'm looking at financing options that we want to help. Emma blinked. What? The building is our home, too. Mrs. Martinez pulled out a folder. We've taken a collection. It's not 92,000, but it's a start. Inside the folder were checks, money orders, cash, some for $20, others for several hundred. A note from the Ahmed family for the new roof. A crayon drawing from Mr. Chen's youngest chess student. Fix the pipes, please. Emma's vision blurred with tears. I can't accept this. It's your money. It's our investment, Mrs. Martinez corrected. In our home. Your grandmother understood that a building is more than walls and floors. It's a community. Now you understand it too. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Mrs. Martinez's words about the folder of contributions, about what it meant to truly own something. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went to her desk. She pulled out a legal pad and began to write ideas flowing faster than she could capture them. By dawn, she had the outline of a plan, one that would honor Grandmother Catherine's legacy, while creating something entirely new. The next day, she called Howard. I need your help with something complex, she said when he answered. How much do you know about community land trusts? 3 weeks later, Emma stood before the residents in the community room once again. But this time, there was no fear, no uncertainty, just curiosity and trust. Thank you all for coming, Emma began. As you know, we've been dealing with some significant challenges since discovering what my sister did to our building's finances. But today, I want to talk about the future. She gestured to Howard and a woman beside him. This is Maria Delgado from the Urban Housing Coalition. She's here to help us explore a new possibility for Cedar Heights. Maria stepped forward. Thank you, Emma. I'm here to talk about community land trusts, a model of shared ownership that keeps housing affordable while giving residents a voice in how their building is managed. For the next hour, Maria explained how a community land trust worked. The building would be placed into a nonprofit trust, ownership would be shared between residents and community stakeholders, and housing would remain permanently affordable through resale restrictions and rent controls. The goal, Maria concluded, is to remove housing from the speculative market and ensure it remains a resource for the community, not a commodity to be bought and sold for profit. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then Mr. Chen raised his hand. So, building not belong to Ms. Emma anymore. That's right, Emma said. It would belong to all of us. I would still be the property manager if you want me to be, but major decisions would be made by a board that includes residents. And our rents? Mrs. Ahmed asked nervously. They would be stabilized, Maria explained, limited to small increases tied to inflation or operating costs. The goal is to keep housing affordable for generations. Another silence fell as residents processed this information. Emma held her breath. This was the right thing to do. She knew it in her bones. But would they see it that way? Finally, Mrs. Martinez stood up. I have lived in this building for 15 years. When I moved in, your grandmother told me something I never forgot. She said, this isn't just my building, it's our building. I think this plan honors that spirit. One by one, other residents voiced their support. Not everyone understood all the details, but they trusted Emma. And more importantly, they trusted the vision of community she'd inherited from Grandmother Catherine. As the meeting broke up, Howard approached Emma. Your grandmother would be very proud, he said quietly. This is exactly what she hoped for when she left you the building. How do you know? Howard smiled. Because she asked me about community land trusts 3 years ago. Said if anything happened to her, I should make sure you knew about them. She thought you might take this path when you were ready. Emma's heart swelled. Even now, Grandmother was guiding her, had seen this possibility long before Emma herself had glimpsed it. As she walked through the building that evening, checking locks and lights as she always did, Emma felt a different kind of ownership. Not the legal ownership of deeds and titles, but the deeper ownership of responsibility and care, the kind grandmother had always practiced. On the building's east wall, the ivy grandmother had loved still grew, now reaching the third floor. Emma touched its leaves, remembering her words. Strong roots, Emma. Everything good comes from strong roots. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, paperwork for the trust repairs, to prioritize relationships to rebuild. But for tonight, Emma was content knowing that Cedar Heights would remain what grandmother had always intended it to be, not just a building, but a home. Not just an asset, but a community. And not for the first time, Emma felt grateful that grandmother Catherine had seen in her something worth trusting, the ability to choose what was right over what was easy, to value people over profit, to understand that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars. As Vanessa's case moved through the legal system, Emma focused on healing the damage her sister had done to the building's finances, to the residents' sense of security, and to her own family relationships. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, the future looked a little brighter, a little more certain. The chess game grandmother had started was approaching its conclusion. And though the board looked nothing like Emma had expected, she was beginning to see the wisdom in grandmother's strategy. Sometimes winning wasn't about taking all the pieces. Sometimes it was about changing the rules of the game entirely. The courtroom was packed on the first day of Vanessa's trial. Media coverage had turned what might have been a routine embezzlement case into a symbol of the city's housing crisis. Lawyer sister versus property manager sister made for irresistible headlines. Emma sat in the gallery between Ruth and Howard, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across the aisle, her parents sat behind Vanessa. Their presence, a show of support that still stung, confirmed they had chosen their side even after everything they'd learned. Vanessa looked composed at the defendant's table. Her attorney, a high-profile defense lawyer known for getting wealthy clients acquitted, whispered last-minute strategy. She'd pleaded not guilty to all charges: embezzlement, fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. All rise, the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Patricia Hernandez presiding. Judge Hernandez, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, took her seat. We're here for the matter of State versus Vanessa Pierce. Is the prosecution ready? We are, Your Honor. Assistant District Attorney James Wright stood. He was younger than Emma had expected, but there was steel in his voice. Defense ready, Your Honor. Vanessa's lawyer Marcus Steinberg responded smoothly. Mr. Wright, your opening statement. The prosecutor approached the jury box. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about betrayal. Betrayal of family trust, betrayal of fiduciary duty, and most critically, betrayal of an elderly woman who was dying of cancer, while the defendant plotted to steal her life's work. He outlined the evidence methodically: the shell companies, the forged signatures, the missing $92,000. With each point, Emma watched the jurors' faces grow more serious. The defense will try to paint this as a family dispute, Wright continued. They'll say Ms. Emma Pierce is a jealous sister, that this is about inheritance and hurt feelings. But the evidence will show something far darker: a calculated scheme to defraud not just a building, but the vulnerable residents who called it home. Steinberg's opening was exactly what Wright had predicted. This is indeed a family dispute, he said with practiced sympathy. A tragic misunderstanding between sisters complicated by grief and conflicting visions for a family property. My client, Vanessa Pierce, is a respected attorney with an impeccable record. She's being persecuted by a sister who resented her success and manipulated their dying grandmother into cutting the family out of their rightful inheritance. Emma felt Ruth's hand squeeze hers as Steinberg continued. We'll show that every action Ms. Pierce took was within her legal rights as the appointed manager of the family trust, that what the prosecution calls embezzlement was actually legitimate business expenses, and that Emma Pierce, motivated by spite, has orchestrated this entire prosecution to destroy her sister's career. The first witness was the forensic accountant. She walked the jury through the financial records with devastating precision. These vendor companies, Mercury Maintenance, Atlas Repairs, Phoenix Property Services, they all share the same Delaware registration address. None have employees' equipment or any history of actual work performed. And where did the money go? Wright asks. To accounts controlled by the defendant. We traced $92,000 in payments to these shell companies, all of which ended up funding personal expenses, vacations, luxury goods, credit card payments. Steinberg tried to shake her on cross-examination, suggesting the expenses were legitimate business entertainment, that the companies were real contractors. But the accountant held firm, producing documentation that demolished each claim. The second day brought the property records expert. This signature purportedly Catherine Pierce's authorization for preliminary sales agreements with Apex Development was made 2 weeks before her death, when hospital records show she was heavily sedated and physically unable to write. Objection, Steinberg called. The witness isn't a medical expert. I'm not testifying to her medical condition, the expert clarified. I'm testifying that the handwriting analysis shows clear signs of forgery, inconsistent pressure letter formations that don't match authenticated samples. And most tellingly, the signature was written with a Mont Blanc pen that records show the defendant purchased 3 days before this document was signed. The third day was the hardest. The prosecution played Emma's recordings of Vanessa, her admission about planning fake bedbug infestations, her callous dismissal of residents' lives, her meetings with developers while grandmother was dying upstairs. Her voice filled the courtroom. They're not our problem once the sale goes through. Emma watched her parents as they heard their successful daughter's true nature laid bare. Mom's face had gone pale. Dad stared at his hands. Then came Emma's turn to testify. State your name for the record, Wright began after she was sworn in. Emma Catherine Pierce. What was your relationship with Catherine Pierce? She was my grandmother, but more than that, she was my mentor, my example of how to live with purpose. Wright led her through the timeline, discovering the rent increases, finding the hidden documents, uncovering the embezzlement. Emma kept her voice steady, focusing on facts rather than emotions. Why didn't you immediately confront your sister when you discovered you owned the building? On the advice of counsel, we wanted to document the full extent of the fraud first. Also, Emma paused, choosing her words carefully. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped there was an explanation that didn't involve my sister stealing from our dying grandmother. And was there such an explanation? No. The evidence only pointed to one conclusion: Vanessa had been systematically defrauding the building, while planning to sell it to developers against grandmother's express wishes. Steinberg's cross-examination was brutal. Isn't it true you've always resented your sister's success? I've never resented Vanessa's legitimate success. I resented her treating our grandmother's legacy as a piggy bank. You lived in that building at below market rent for years, didn't you? I did, in exchange for managing the property, maintaining it, and being on call 24/7 for emergencies, while your sister worked 60-hour weeks building her career. While my sister apparently worked those hours planning to steal from our family business, yes. He tried angle after angle, painting Emma as lazy, jealous, manipulative. But she had truth on her side, and truth has a way of standing firm against accusations. You secretly inherited a $12 million building and didn't tell your family for 3 years. Doesn't that make you the deceptive one? I didn't know I'd inherited it until after Vanessa tried to destroy the lives of dozens of families. My grandmother structured it that way to protect those families from exactly what Vanessa attempted. On the fourth day, the residents testified. Mrs. Martinez spoke about raising her children at Cedar Heights, about the community grandmother had built. Mr. Chen described fleeing persecution, finding safety in apartment 2B. The Ahmed family talked about starting their American dream in a place that welcomed them. The defendant saw us as obstacles to profit, Mrs. Martinez said, tears in her eyes. But Mrs. Catherine saw us as people, as family. Steinberg tried to dismiss them as biased, but their dignity and honesty resonated with the jury. The most dramatic moment came when Vanessa took the stand in her own defense. Steinberg tried to paint her as a dedicated daughter, trying to maximize value for her family. But Wright's cross-examination was surgical. You met with Apex Development while your grandmother was dying. I was exploring options for the family's future. Yes or no? Did you meet with developers while your grandmother was in hospice care? Yes, but did you tell her about these meetings? She wasn't in a condition to understand complex business. So that's a no. Did you tell your sister who was caring for your grandmother daily? Emma wouldn't have understood. Another no. Did you create shell companies to build a building for work that was never performed? Those were legitimate vendors. Wright produced the evidence again, piece by damning piece with each question. With each answer, Vanessa's composed facade cracked a little more. Ms. Pierce, in this recorded conversation, you said you planned to make staying uncomfortable enough that residents would leave voluntarily. What did you mean by introducing bedbugs? Well, I was speaking hypothetically. That's your hypothesis. The jury looked disgusted. Vanessa's attempts to explain only deepened the hole she dug. In closing arguments, Wright was devastating. The defendant wants you to believe this is about family jealousy, but embezzlement isn't a family dispute. Fraud isn't a sibling rivalry. Elder abuse isn't a difference of opinion. These are crimes, and the evidence proves beyond reasonable doubt that Vanessa Pierce committed them. Steinberg made one last attempt, arguing that Vanessa had acted within the law, as she understood it that any irregularities were honest mistakes, that sending her to prison would destroy a promising career over what amounted to aggressive business practices. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Hernandez asked. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of embezzlement in the first degree, how do you find guilty? On the charge of fraud, guilty. On the charge of elder abuse, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, guilty. With each guilty, Emma watched Vanessa shrink in her chair. The composed, confident sister who'd smirked while tripling Emma's rent was gone. In her place sat someone forced to face the consequences of her choices. Mom sobbed quietly. Dad's face was stone. They'd backed the wrong daughter, and now everyone knew it. Judge Hernandez scheduled sentencing for the following month. As court officers prepared to take Vanessa into custody, her bail revoked after the guilty verdict, she turned to look at Emma. For a moment, Emma saw her sister not the predator she'd become, but the girl who taught her to ride a bike, who'd snuck her cookies when Mom said no. Then the moment passed, and Vanessa's face hardened. I hope you're happy, she said. I'm not, Emma replied honestly, but I am relieved that you can't hurt anyone else. As they led Vanessa away, Emma stood on shaking legs. Ruth hugged her. Howard patted her shoulder, and the residents who'd come to support her offered quiet congratulations. But there was no joy in winning, only the sad satisfaction of knowing she'd done what was necessary to protect the people who depended on her. Justice had been served, but it tasted like ashes. The morning of Vanessa's sentencing arrived gray and drizzling, fitting weather for what felt like a funeral. Emma dressed carefully in the navy suit grandmother had bought her for her college graduation. Every woman needs one perfect suit, she'd said. Today seemed like the right time to wear it. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. The case had become a symbol of the city's housing crisis, with editorial writers using phrases like greed versus community and the human cost of gentrification. Emma kept her head down, letting Howard guide her through the mob of cameras and microphones. Inside the gallery was packed again, but this time Emma noticed new faces. Other property managers, tenant advocates, even city council members. What had started as a family dispute had become something larger. Her parents sat in their usual spot, looking older than she'd ever seen them. Mom had called several times since the verdict, leaving voicemails Emma couldn't bring herself to return. What was there to say? They'd chosen their side, and now they all had to live with the consequences. Vanessa entered in custody wearing county jail orange instead of her designer suits. The months since her conviction had worn on her. Her face was thinner, her perfect posture slightly slumped, but when their eyes met, Emma still saw defiance there. All rise, the bailiff called, and Judge Hernandez took her seat. We're here for sentencing in the matter of State versus Vanessa Pierce. I've reviewed the pre-sentencing report, the victim impact statements, and the arguments from both sides. She looked at Vanessa. Ms. Pierce, would you like to make a statement before I pronounce sentence? Vanessa stood Steinberg beside her. Yes, Your Honor. She unfolded a piece of paper with shaking hands. I want to start by saying that I maintain my innocence. I believe I acted within my rights as property manager and in the best interests of my family's financial future. A murmur ran through the gallery. Even now, she couldn't admit what she'd done. However, she continued, I acknowledge that my actions caused pain to the residents of Cedar Heights Apartments. That was never my intention. I was raised to believe that success meant maximizing profit. That sentiment had no place in business. I see now that this philosophy has cost me everything: my career, my freedom, and my family. She turned to look at Emma directly. Emma, I know you think you've won, but what have you really accomplished? You're still managing a rundown building for people who will never appreciate your sacrifice. You'll never have the life you could have had. And for what? So strangers can have cheap rent. That's enough, Ms. Pierce, Judge Hernandez interrupted. This is meant to be a statement of remorse, not a continuation of your trial arguments. Vanessa folded her paper. I'm finished, Your Honor. Very well. The court has received numerous victim impact statements, but I understand Ms. Emma Pierce wishes to address the court directly. Emma hadn't planned to speak, but standing there, seeing Vanessa still unrepentant, she knew she had to. Yes, Your Honor. Emma approached the podium, her prepared statement suddenly feeling inadequate, so she spoke from the heart instead. Your Honor, people keep asking me if I'm happy my sister is going to prison. I'm not. This isn't about happiness, it's about protection. Vanessa stole money, yes, but she tried to steal something far more valuable: the homes and dignity of dozens of families. She turned to face Vanessa. You ask what I've accomplished. I've kept Mrs. Martinez in the apartment where she raised her children. I've ensured Mr. Chen can grow old in the home he found after fleeing persecution. I've protected the Ahmed family's American dream. That's not nothing, Vanessa. That's everything. Her voice grew stronger. You say they'll never appreciate my sacrifice, but you're wrong. Every birthday card from a resident, every child who runs to hug me in the hallway, every thank you from a family that can afford groceries because their rent is reasonable, that's appreciation worth more than any luxury condo development. Emma looked at Judge Hernandez. Your Honor, my grandmother used to say that we're measured not by what we accumulate, but by what we preserve for others. Vanessa tried to destroy what grandmother preserved. She violated the trust of a dying woman who loved her, stole from families who could least afford it, and even now shows no real remorse. I ask that the court consider not just the financial crimes, but the human cost of her actions. As Emma returned to her seat, Ruth squeezed her hand. Catherine would be so proud, she whispered. Judge Hernandez reviewed her notes before speaking. Ms. Pierce, you were convicted of embezzlement fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. The pre-sentencing report shows a pattern of deliberate calculating behavior spanning years. You abused your position of trust, stole from vulnerable residents, and exploited your grandmother's illness for personal gain. She paused, her stern gaze fixed on Vanessa. What troubles this court most is your complete lack of genuine remorse. Even now you frame your crimes as business decisions, as if that somehow mitigates the harm you've caused. You've shown no understanding of the human impact of your actions. The sentencing guidelines suggest 8 to 12 years. The prosecution has asked for the maximum. The defense requests leniency based on the defendant's lack of prior record and professional accomplishments. Emma's heart pounded as Judge Hernandez continued. However, this court must consider the egregious nature of these crimes. You are an attorney, Ms. Pierce. You knew the law and chose to break it. You used your legal knowledge not to help others, but to construct elaborate schemes to defraud. You betrayed your profession, your family, and most importantly, the vulnerable residents who depended on stable housing. She lifted her gavel. Therefore, this court sentences you to 10 years in state prison with possibility of parole after 7. You are ordered to pay full restitution of $92,000 to Cedar Heights Apartments. Upon release, you will be permanently disbarred from practicing law. You will serve 5 years probation following your incarceration. The gavel came down with finality. Vanessa swayed on her feet, Steinberg steadying her. 10 years, a decade of her life gone. This court is adjourned. As officers prepared to lead Vanessa away, Emma's mother suddenly stood. Wait, please. Can I speak to my daughter? Judge Hernandez nodded, and the officers allowed Mom to approach. Emma watched as she reached for Vanessa, who stood stiff and unresponsive. I'm sorry, Mom sobbed. We failed you. We taught you that money mattered more than people. And now, you're only sorry because I'm paying for believing you, Vanessa said coldly. You all wanted me to be successful to make you proud to make us rich. I did what you raised me to do. No, Dad spoke for the first time, his voice broken. We raised you wrong, Vanessa. Emma learned the right lessons despite us from Catherine. We should have listened to her. Vanessa laughed bitterly. Too late for should-haves, Dad. I hope you enjoy spending my commissary money for the next 10 years. The officers led her away, her orange jumpsuit disappearing through the courtroom doors. Emma's parents stood frozen, watching their golden child vanish into the prison system. Outside, the rain had stopped. Reporters swarmed again, but this time Emma paused on the courthouse steps. Ms. Pierce, how do you feel about the sentence? Someone shouted. Emma thought for a moment. I feel grateful that justice was served, but mostly I feel sad. Sad that greed destroyed my family. Sad that it took criminal prosecution to stop my sister from making dozens of families homeless. And sad that she still doesn't understand why what she did was wrong. What's next for Cedar Heights Apartments? Another reporter asked. What's always been next? Emma said. We continue being a community. We maintain affordable housing in a city that desperately needs it. We prove that Grandmother Catherine was right, that taking care of each other matters more than maximizing profit. Will you reconcile with your parents? Emma glanced back to see them emerging from the courthouse looking lost and broken. That's up to them. They need to decide what kind of people they want to be. My door is open when they figure that out. Back at Cedar Heights, the residents had organized a gathering in the community room. Not a celebration, they all understood this wasn't a happy ending, but a moment of closure. To Catherine Pierce, Mr. Chen raised his coffee mug, who saw the future and protected us all. To Emma, Mrs. Martinez added, who had the courage to do what was right even when it cost her everything. It didn't cost me everything, Emma said, looking around at their faces. It showed me what I really had all along. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who stand with you, who trust you, who make a community worth protecting. Ruth pulled out a photo Grandmother and Emma taken the day she'd secretly made her the owner. She knew, didn't she? Ruth asked softly. Knew this day would come. She knew Vanessa, Emma said, and she knew me. Most importantly, she knew what mattered. As the gathering wound down and residents returned to their apartments, their secure, affordable apartments, Emma went to her office. On the wall hung Grandmother's favorite quote, cross-stitched and framed, "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." Vanessa had chased the living and lost everything. Emma had protected what they could give, and in doing so, found her life's purpose. The phone rang. Another property management company probably calling to offer her a job again. They'd been calling since the trial started, impressed by her principles and dedication. Emma let it go to voicemail. She had work to do, maintenance schedules to review, a new family moving into 4A next week, Mr. Chen's chess club to help organize. Life at Cedar Heights went on as Grandmother had intended. 10 years. Vanessa would serve 10 years for trying to destroy all this. And Emma would spend those same 10 years and many more making sure her greed had been for nothing. Making sure Cedar Heights remained what Grandmother had envisioned, a place where home meant more than money. That wasn't revenge. It was justice. And it was exactly what Grandmother would have wanted. 6 months after the sentencing, Emma stood in the courthouse lobby again, but this time for a very different reason. The manila envelope in her hands contained the deed transfer papers. She was officially placing Cedar Heights Apartments into a community land trust, ensuring it would remain affordable housing forever. Howard stood beside her, along with Ruth and a dozen residents who'd come to witness this moment. Even her parents were there, sitting quietly in the back, their presence a tentative step toward reconciliation. You sure about this? Howard asked one last time. You're essentially giving up millions in potential wealth. I'm sure, Emma said, signing her name with Grandmother's own fountain pen. Wealth isn't just about money. Grandmother taught me that. The news had broken that morning. Property manager gives away $12 million building to ensure affordable housing. Reporters were already gathering outside, but this wasn't about headlines. It was about fulfilling a promise. As they emerged from the courthouse, the afternoon sun breaking through Portland's typical clouds, Emma saw a familiar figure across the street. Marcus Wolf from Apex Development stood there, his phone pressed to his ear, no doubt calculating if there was still some angle to exploit. When he caught Emma's eye, she simply smiled and shook her head. He turned and walked away, finally understanding that Cedar Heights was never going to be his. Back at the building, they held a ceremony in the community room. The new trust board, comprised of residents, community advocates, and housing experts, officially took responsibility for Cedar Heights' future. Emma would stay on as property manager, but now she worked for the community directly. Speech, Mr. Chen called out, and others joined in. Emma stood at the front of the room, looking at all these faces that had become family. 3 years ago, when grandmother was dying, she told me something I didn't understand at the time. She said, Emma, buildings are just brick and mortar, but homes are made of trust. I trust you to know the difference. Emma paused, seeing nods of understanding around the room. Today, we've ensured that Cedar Heights will always be homes, not just housing. That future residents will find the same welcome that Mr. Chen found when he arrived from China, that the Martinez family found when they needed a place to start over, that every family here found when they needed it most. But this isn't just about preserving the past. It's about securing the future. The trust will maintain affordable rents while ensuring proper maintenance and improvements. No one will get rich off Cedar Heights, but everyone will have a chance at a stable home. Mrs. Martinez wiped tears from her eyes. What would Catherine say if she could see this? She'd probably say, "It's about time," Ruth interjected, making everyone laugh. And then she'd remind us all that the real work is just beginning. She was right. The trust structure meant constant vigilance, community involvement, and careful management. But it also meant security, no future. Vanessa could swoop in and destroy what they'd built. Later that evening, Emma found herself alone in her office, sorting through the day's mail. Among the usual bills and maintenance requests was a letter with familiar handwriting. Her breath caught. It was from Vanessa. Emma almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. Emma, it read, I heard about the trust. You gave away $12 million. Even now I can't understand why. But I've had 6 months to think in here, and maybe that's the point. Maybe I'll never understand because we see the world through completely different lenses. I still believe I was acting in the family's best interest. I still think you're a fool. But I'm beginning to realize that my definition of best interest might have been flawed. Mom writes me about the building, about the residents, about you. She seems different now, softer. She volunteers at the food bank and talks about grandmother constantly. I think losing everything finally taught her what actually mattered. I have 9.5 years left to think about that. I won't ask for forgiveness. We both know I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm starting to understand why grandmother chose you. Not because you were the better person, though, clearly you were, but because you could see what I was blind to, that home means more than equity. Don't write back. I'm not ready for that. Maybe I never will be. V. Emma sat with the letter for a long time, then filed it away. Maybe someday Vanessa would truly understand what she'd tried to destroy. Maybe not. Either way, Cedar Heights was safe. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. The Ahmed's youngest daughter, Lily, peeked in. Miss Emma, Mama wanted me to give you this. She handed Emma a card handmade with construction paper and glitter. Inside, in careful children's handwriting, thank you for keeping our home safe. Love, Lily. This was wealth. Emma walked through the building that evening, checking locks and lights as always. In the community room, teenagers were doing homework together. In the courtyard, elderly residents shared tea and gossip. Through apartment windows, she saw families sharing dinner lives unfolding in the security of stable homes. On the building's east wall, the ivy grandmother had loved still grew, now reaching the 3rd floor. Emma touched its leaves, remembering her words. Strong roots, Emma. Everything good comes from strong roots. Her phone buzzed a text from Howard. Congratulations again. Catherine would be over the moon. P.S. The Times wants to do a feature story. Interested. Emma thought about it, then typed back. Only if they focus on the residents. Not me. This was never about me. As she headed back to her apartment, she passed the plaque they'd installed that morning. Cedar Heights Apartments, established 1976 by Catherine Pierce, preserved in perpetuity for the community. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. 10 years from now, when Vanessa walked out of prison, this building would still be here, still affordable, still home to families who needed it. The ivy would have grown higher. The residents would have changed, but the mission would remain. Vanessa had asked what Emma had accomplished by choosing community over cash. The answer was all around her in every maintained apartment, every child playing safely in the courtyard, every elderly resident aging in place with dignity. Emma had accomplished exactly what grandmother had envisioned. She'd proven that greed didn't always win, that communities could fight back, that sometimes the little sister who everyone underestimated could change the game entirely. Vanessa had tried to raise her rent from $2,350 to $7,100. She'd smirked, as their parents called it, fair. She'd thought she held all the cards. But grandmother had taught Emma that in the end, the house doesn't always win. Sometimes the home does, and that's not just a victory. That's a legacy worth preserving.